people's lives exist right now, and they're on a waiting list right now, and they're failing to have economic opportunity right now. But it is also the fact that the narrative, people, I don't want to use, the narrative of talking about this place as a basket case, etc., the shithole word that was so dominant a couple of months ago, that's a disaster in terms of how people in the south think about this region as well. I'm an Irish person who has lived my whole adult life in the UK. That's not exactly how I wish things constitutionally, but that's what the majority want, so I make it work. When we go to have, for example, a referendum in the Republic, if people are able to go, sure, look at the state of them. They can't make it work up there. They can't spend the money that they have properly. Look at the state of their rivers, lochs, look at the public services. That's going to make the conversation more difficult in the Republic. We had a tough lot of years, a tough few elections, but we've done a lot of thinking about who we are and what we're for, and we're pretty confident about the space. And I think people ask that a little bit less, what the SDLP is for. So
Claire Hanna, leader of the SDLP, you're very welcome to the BelTel.
Thanks very much, Ciarán. It's lovely to meet you.
Claire, I mean, it might seem a ridiculous question, but why are you in politics?
And sometimes I ask myself that. I suppose, Ciarán, at its most basic, I want to make the world a better place. I want to make the place better for everybody who lives here, for my own family. And yeah, I mean, I don't go too much into the isms and the ideologies, but I'm a social democrat, and I know that doesn't mean that much to people who aren't political wonks. But it's a worldview to me that's about kind of social cohesion, trying to reconcile competing interests. It's about finding the opportunity for people, finding ambition for the region, rewarding people's work while looking after the vulnerable, and just taking a positive role in the community and our positive role in the world. And I suppose the opportunity to do that, and in some ways to contribute, is genuinely one it's really hard not to take.
So in terms of your politics, is like social democracy, and that's what you've said. You haven't said you're an Irish nationalist.
I am in the Irish nationalist tradition. Yeah,
but you may well say that, and you have. In terms of social democracy, if you're a real nerd about these things and you're into your isms, the left will often chastise people. They will use the word social democrat as some sort of form of weakness, someone who just can't make up their mind about things. Do you think, I suppose, in terms of social democracy, that's just the best we can do?
Well, look, it is, and another day, I mean, democratic socialism, to me, it's the same thing. It's I suppose reconciling the economy and the world that we live in with the society we want and that we're trying to create, and it's acknowledging that we don't have, there are mega corporations, there are international structures, there are things we don't have full control over, and doing your best within those frameworks to give people access to a decent life, decent working conditions, for example, and obviously it has a defined role for organised labour, giving people access to nature and just creativity and the arts, and I think all of that fits, to me, most neatly inside democratic socialism. Like I say, I'm not what is it they say about ideologues? They can't change their minds and they won't change the subject. My political worldview and my political thinking time isn't in the recesses and the corner and the theory. Politics isn't something I've studied, but that, to me, I think sometimes people say, ideology is the problem. I think parties should have a worldview, and the SDLP, from its inception, 5+ decades ago, didn't locate as, the Nationalist Party or the Irish Party, because we know that competing nationalisms aren't on their own a solution. And sometimes if parties say, we don't have an ideology, we just want to do what works, well, then that's just a series of kind of hot takes, or maybe self-interest, or maybe looking out for one particular tribe, rather than people. If you do have a defined worldview, the SDLP is proud to identify as social democracy. People can come to expect certain responses from a political party, and to know what you're about and what you'll do in given circumstances. But look, I know that's not how people are receiving politics. But it's, I suppose, when I wake up and the decisions I make, and as a party, the decisions we make, it's not just a kind of what we read off the internet that morning, or what we think will get most votes. It fits into a strategy and a view of the world.
A lot of people are shouting at each other on social media. A lot of people are talking about isms. A lot of people are talking about isms that frankly, I don't think that they really understand at all. They're using words in a pejorative sense. You mentioned study. What did you study, just as a matter of interest?
Well, when I was 18, I knew everything. So I didn't actually go straight to university, and I went out to, I worked and did some travel and all that. And then in my mid-20s, I did a degree with the Open University in International Relations, which I was working in overseas development at the time, and then I did a master's in law about 10 years ago at Queen's. So I was a mature student when I noticed some gaps in my knowledge that weren't clear to me in my late teens.
Atmosphere like in Westminster. I mean, you're a social democrat. You're happy to use democratic socialist. It's a very small space, I feel, in British politics. But you know more than me because you're in Westminster. We see. Well, we have seen reform as a new force, but then we've seen so many of the Conservatives, Boris Johnson's cabinet en masse going across into that. I just wonder what the atmosphere is like there. Where do you think politics is going in Britain?
Yeah, look, I will say, and I don't mean to be dismissive. I mean, I take a polite interest in it. I some of the kind of personality stuff leaves me a wee bit cold. I am in Westminster. I'm in Westminster a part of the week. You know, I'm unashamedly in Westminster as little as I need to be. Sometimes that's a day, sometimes it's two. I don't hang about there because my life, and primarily my political life, is here, and I work out of Stormont, for example, on a Monday. I'm in Dublin at least 2 or 3 times a month, and but obviously anything to do with us in Westminster, and I'm there, particularly through the Select Committee. But like a lot of the politics leaves me cold, and I think there's a growing values mismatch. I see very clearly where we are on the pecking order, and that's not hostility to Northern Ireland. But it is, you know, there's a lot of political mouths to feed over there, and Northern Ireland's interests aren't at the top of people's agenda. Everybody's fighting for their own patch. The UK obviously is not the wealthy country that it had been, and it hasn't maybe adjusted to its, I suppose, capacity and ability. And I think, Ciarán, that's one of the reasons. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I am actively pursuing, and the SDLP is actively pursuing, constitutional change, because whether we like it or not, the UK is changing. Even there are parties here who, like me, you know, their analysis is of Westminster and the UK government is not good, but we're just passengers in wherever they want to take us if we don't think about our own constitutional future.
The way you describe your relationship with Westminster, I've never heard that before, and that's very interesting. I am slightly joking here, but it's almost like a partial abstentionism. Like, I'll go. No, I mean, it's not. I mean, but you're not gonna just totally saturate yourself in all of the boozing that goes on there.
No, I'm not. As I say, I mean, I've young kids. Apart from anything else, I'm really a dedicated constituency MP. You know, and as I say, I lead the SDLP, and I take that seriously in terms of being out and about in other constituencies as well. So I'm there when I need to be. You know, you can go and check out my record in terms of, as I say, the Select Committee. You know, pretty much full attendance at that and anything. But if there's a debate about a train station in Dorset, no, I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be out in my own constituency and engaging in things here. And I think you can do both. Now, it obviously is the place that deals with international affairs, for example, and I think people do want to be represented. And actually, I think Colm Eastwood and I have done that, and have. I suppose we were some of the strongest and earliest voices on things like Gaza, and Westminster politics has kind of followed in many regards. So no, it's not a partial abstentionism. It's kind of where it counts, when it counts, and things. But we're not, we're there to represent people here. We're there to interpret this region as well for people there. But no, I'm not there. I'm not there for a party. Wouldn't be my scene.
The SDLP. I mean, I remember well the period around the Good Friday Agreement. Perhaps it's a line you've heard before, but I certainly felt at the time that in terms of the Good Friday Agreement, that the SDLP had achieved its aim. And when you achieve your aim, what's next?
Yeah, I mean, people say that. Don't say that as much recently.
Well,
I
it's
think
a long
we
time
are.
ago.
Yeah, no, I think we are and have established ourselves. Not least in the last year as a coherent kind of centre-left, anti-sectarian New Ireland party, and that isn't a reinvention. That's kind of the SDLP's values from Hume Mallon onwards. And when you think about the things that the SDLP was founded for and was about, we're, I suppose, evolving those. Peace. It was a project it was a party that was set up to stop, the hot war that was costing lives. We're now focused on evolving that into reconciliation. It was about power sharing. That is now about getting good government, Ciarán, because nobody could possibly tell you that what we have is good government. We were a party founded for, equality. That hasn't evolved into opportunity and prosperity for people, and a party that was about the North-South dimension. And we are now actively pursuing constitutional change as a realisation of that. So it is the SDLP's core mission and values, but I'm leading the party in 2026 and not 1996, and we're adapting to the world around us. So I'll be honest, we've done a lot of thinking. I don't think it's any secret. We had a tough lot of years, a tough few elections, but we've done a lot of thinking about who we are and what we're for, and we're pretty confident about the space. And I think people ask that a little bit less, what the SDLP is for. I think it's becoming clearer, and I think the space for those values, a party with our heritage and kind of ability to bring people together and to chart a course when in difficult times, but a party with that value set. Because if you think of the big Venn diagram of parties that are pursuing good government, and parties that are anti-sectarian, and parties that are have an international worldview and will represent you where you need to go, and who are pursuing constitutional change, no party is doing all of those things except the SDLP.
And we'll return to some of those issues, because I want to deal with Stormont and constitutional change. I think they deserve their own sections if you want to know. If you
Sorry,
want to
I'm ranging all over the place.
No. But I mean, that's what we're here to do. No, I asked John Burrows the other day. I asked him if he lived in England, like which party would he vote for, and which party would he be involved with. Now, many people have pointed out, and listen, I understand it's in some ways it's not a fair question, but you've been identified with the Irish Labour Party at the same time as Colin Eastwood has been identified with Fianna Fáil, at the same time as Mark Durkan has been identified with Fine Gael. Now, for many people in the north, that will mean practically nothing. But for other people, perhaps closer to the border, who keep their eye on southern politics, that's very confusing, Claire.
I don't know that it is, because actually here, as in the Republic, as in other places like Scotland, where there is a constitutional fracture, that does often define parties, and parties are organised maybe around some of those divisions rather than the traditional left-right scale. So, and yes, I am, proudly always have been, always will be. I'm not a tribal person, but I do see myself as part of the Labour family, wherever. And if I was in Spain, I'd support the Labour Party there, etc. So no, I don't think it's that unusual. I mean, the SDLP has been a broad church, but with clear shared values, and there are social democrats in Fianna Fáil, and there are social democrats even in Fine Gael as well. But what we are, Ciarán, is a party that can convene in the Republic, that can find, and that's a big part of what we've been doing over the last year as we try and I know we'll come back to the issue of constitutional change, but it is about finding the people who are interested in the north, who are warm to this region, and working with them, I suppose. And some of that is about reprofiling, and that links to what we're going to talk about.
You want to be I think what you're saying is it's good to be liked in the south rather than being seen as a political rival.
Well, it's also good to be, for there to be common ground in democratic Ireland, for the north not to become a political football, not to become something that is weaponised, not to become something that people, form a political worldview because they see it as a competitor. And as I say, that's entirely compatible with our values, and it's something we can do to add value in the here and now, in representing northern needs to parties across the political spectrum, and having good relationships with the Irish government, whoever is in that government, with the opposition, whoever is in that opposition, and I think that is a formula that has worked well for the people we represent for all those years, which is why it was a formula I was so protective of during, and I mean, the 2019 period, as I said, it was a grim time for the SDLP. Remember, we had no institutions of the Good Friday Agreement. We had no MPs. It looked like we were having a very hard Brexit at that time, and the party, was pursuing a specific relationship. But I think that broad-based ability, that convening power, I think is an asset for us as a political party, but for the people we represent in the main. So I'm comfortable with that.
You couldn't be very clear. You couldn't be clearer about that, I should say. The EU, the SDLP, has always been a very strong supporter of the EU. Now, we're no longer in the EU. You have to go across the border to be back in the EU. I was looking for a clip recently, and I came across Eamon McCann in Stormont, and he was in full flow. And
that's a fine thing to watch when Eamon McCann's
yes,
a yeah.
And his enmity for the EU, goes well beyond Nigel Farage. For Eamon, the EU is a capitalist, imperialist construct. And you got up and you give him both barrels. I think what it was is, to be honest, he said, like, what the EU has done to Greece. And you said, well, Greece is bankrupt, and they lent them money with caveats. And you were I just noticed how strong you were in that. Are you still very passionate about the EU?
Yeah, look. As I say, it's an internationalist outlook, and I mean, from the get go, our party was able to see the value of the EU, of a wider horizon for trade, but also, the shared identity that it was always possible to give us. That Hume used to talk about. The French are still French, and the Germans are still Germans. And the possibility here that Irish people are still Irish, British people are still British, but we can share that platform, share that opportunity. That didn't work out exactly how I envisaged it, but yeah, I am positive about it. Am I saying that the EU is absolutely perfect? I'm certainly not, and I have, in fact, its political character at the moment is to the centre right. It's not the kind of social Europe, and it doesn't have as ethical a foreign policy as I would wish. But at the time when people, and I fought so hard, the Brexit referendum, I'm one of a small number of people who fought hard before the referendum for a Remain vote, rather than just the picking up the pieces, and the kind of Lexit analysis frustrated me, because I'm sorry, those votes were counted in the same pile as Farage and all. And yes, I mean, even in terms of how the EU was responding to what was then known as the immigration crisis, wasn't perfect, but no, further borders weren't the solution to people, for people either. So it's not about the EU itself as an institution. It's about the concept, as I say, of interdependence, about trying to, handle rapacious capitalism. You can't do that as an individual nation state. Trying to address climate change, you can't do that as an individual nation state. Trying to, as I say, be a positive force in the world. It's better when it's collectivised. And I think the EU, it's been really positive for the island of Ireland as a whole, that open kind of dynamic economy. And I think people want that uncomplicated return to the European Union. And I think that will be a driver in the constitutional conversation to come as well.
Well, that remains to be seen. And of course, we have people on one hand saying the EU is a communist organisation, other people saying it's an uber capitalist organisation. Some people say the EU drowns people in the Mediterranean. Some people say the EU is open borders. Some people say the EU has provoked Russia to invade Ukraine. People have these, extremely diverse views on the EU, and a lot of people simply don't like Ursula von der Leyen.
Yeah, but look, the bottom line is you can't solve the big problems. No man is an island and no nation is either, and you have to cooperate. And yes, inevitably, when you create an organisation that has 500 million moving parts, 500 people, human beings living in it, it's going to be bureaucratic, it's going to be complex. You're going to have the rough with the smooth, but it has been an enormous benefit for people here, and I regret, and I know we're going to. I'm not trying to change the subject from Stormont. I'd love to talk to you about that, but we got ourselves into this position in the Brexit years, where all we talked about was sausages and the movement of sausages, and we stopped talking about the wider horizons. We stopped talking about the benefits it had given of people's opportunity to live elsewhere, the opportunity of other people and talent and ideas coming here, and the fact that so many of our sectors quite simply could not survive without access to that market. So we got really, really narrow and fighty and sectarian, and the agreement in my mind was about not having to focus so much on sovereignty and all of that. And Brexit, unfortunately, meant that for years that's all we talked about. But yeah, look, I think on balance, it's absolutely, the SDLP is unequivocally a pro-European party.
You mentioned immigration there a couple of times, actually. And one of the things one notices is that many people believe that they should have the right to go wherever they want in the world, but that no one else does. I mean, that hypocrisy goes down to human nature. But during the Ballymena riots last year, you were on Talkback. I think it was someone from the DUP. I'm pretty sure I know who it was. And he said, well, probably on the right of the DUP, but he said, listen, we need to have an honest conversation with people about, people have been moving around the world forever. It's not going to stop. And you did say that people were all trying to calm other people down. You're saying, listen, we have got to acknowledge that there are a lot of positives to immigration, and there are a lot of negatives. Not a lot of negatives. You said there were negatives. I think.
I think if we're talking about the same, I said immigration's like the weather. It's neither inherently good or inherently bad. It is a reality of the world. And I think, as you say, we as people, it's a cliche, but have moved around the world and have had the opportunity to do so. The talent and the kind of enrichment of our cultural offering, of our business offering, and all of that is enhanced as well, of course. And I've been clear, there are always resource pressures, but Ciarán, they are, you won't be surprised to hear me say, as frequently as a result of poor political decisions about how we spend the gains. And the numbers are fairly clear in terms of the positive impact on our economy and the fact that, access to labour that businesses need. But the gains of that haven't for years, because we haven't been, for example, investing in housing, social housing and other types of housing as well. We haven't addressed the needs of the health service. So I'm unequivocally defensive of it as a concept. And also we've got in the last few years far past it just being a discussion about immigration. I talk about immigration all the time. It's a Westminster competency. So I've been in many a debate. So people who say we're not allowed to talk about it don't want to talk about the details of it and the workforce issues and all of that. But it is also, Ballymena, a classic example, that wasn't so much about immigration as just blatant racism. And I've said before, if somebody was born here but has a different colour skin, they're getting the same abuse about immigration as somebody who just moved here 2 years ago. The people who are picking up and feeding off the hatred that's coming out of that discussion aren't differentiating about who's come from where and what role they're playing in society. It's they're treating people poorly and attacking people often on the basis of the colour of their skin. And there's a wider racism discussion as well that needs to be had separately to the mechanics and the whys and wherefores and the economies of immigration.
If we leave, just before I move on from that, if we leave social media aside, are you getting anything on the doors and the emails coming to the office, people talking about immigration? Because it's hard sometimes to really, because for many people, and this is not just unionist areas, by the way. I mean, there are protests and there are sort of nascent movements in some or groups in many nationalist areas as well. I mean, how important do you think it really is to people? Because it's difficult to say. Northern Ireland does not have a high amount of immigration. It just simply doesn't.
No, it doesn't. And actually, probably the headline statistic is that our immigration problem is young people leaving. Actually, young people from here leaving because they find the politics suffocating. I live in South Belfast. I live in the Ormeau area, which is the most mixed and diverse part of possibly this whole island. And I can't remember the exact statistic, but going on in the DEA I live in, and in the ward, going on 20-30% not born here. So actually, I read, I'm not being hyper wonky, but in The Economist this week about it's the pace of change that seems to be communities that have traditionally been diverse, like the one that I live in, are much less disturbed by immigration and by changing faces and by diversity than those for whom the pace of change has been quite acute. Look, I get it. If people feel that they don't have economic opportunities, if they feel that they're not accessing public services, and people are feeling completely disempowered in general by our politics, sometimes it's the obvious place to go, and that is absolutely being fed and driven by negative actors. So I'm not saying that people have nothing to complain about. Like I say, there are pressures in public services because of poor political decision making, but I am unequivocal that is never in any way, your feelings about that are never a good reason to go and kick in somebody's door or call them a slur or abuse kids on their way to work or on their way to school or whatever. But I think the scientific answer seems to be that it's the pace of change rather than the overall diversity of an area.
And you have nothing to fear at the ballot box on this issue?
Oh gosh, I think all politicians should always fear the ballot box. But no, it's not. I'm being really honest with you. Okay. It's not a dominant issue in my caseload at all, or in the conversations I have with people in the everyday. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't people who have concerns. But no, I mean, I think if I looked in the data and spoke to my casework team and delved through the inbox, it wouldn't be in the top 10 of issues I get correspondence on.
Okay. Claire, if we picked up any newspaper from here, from Belfast or Derry newspaper, and if we go and read a political blog, there seems to be somewhat of a consensus amongst the commentariat and political analysts, and that is to say, no one feels positive about Stormont. The consensus seems to be that it doesn't work. I mean, and I suppose the public might have, well, if it doesn't work, then why do we have it?
Yeah, I'm really sad about that, by the way. I mean, we're the constructive opposition, and it's not, we're about building something new and not about tearing things down. And yes, your own papers, polls from Lucid at the weekend saying that only 1 in 4 people believe that Stormont has a positive impact on their life. That's a terrible indictment. I don't think it has to be that way, though, Ciarán. So it's not a case of either we have crap government or we've no government at all. And that's what we've been served up, and that's what the impression that has been given, that, well, look, it either exists or it doesn't exist, and you can't expect it to be good. That's quite simply not true. Yes, the structures do limit its potential, and I'm going to come back to that. But we want it to be better, and as the opposition, we both have really serious proposals on reform. But we have brought forward everything from things that have been picked up, by the way, on things like childcare, on Loughney, on housing rates. I'm speaking to you today, where Matthew O'Toole and others have forced the finance minister to acknowledge the damage that his rates-free val was going to do in hospitality. Those are all political choices that don't have to be made. So yes, some of it is the structures, but we are really, really disturbed by the ebbing of confidence away from Stormont, and we are determined to do something better with it. That's entirely compatible with our project of being a party for constitutional change. Because, Ciarán, here's the thing. One, this isn't a constitutional waiting room. This isn't about there is a slight danger, particularly in Northern nationalism, of a sort of a impression that we'll get our reward in heaven. Things will be so rubbish, and that means that everyone will tumble into a new Ireland and demographics will get us there. It doesn't. People's lives exist right now, and they're on a waiting list right now, and they're failing to have economic opportunity right now. But it is also the fact that the narrative, people, I don't want to use, the narrative of talking about this place as a basket case, etc., the shithole word that we was so dominant a couple of months ago, that's a disaster in terms of how people in the south think about this region as well. So it absolutely has to work, and no matter how much we're setting each other's teeth on edge, at the moment Stormont is the place to do that, and the SDLP is really determined to do everything we can to make that work better.
Just on those reforms,
sure.
They sounded a wee bit policy reforms rather than structural reforms. Because, I mean, when we talk...
I'm going to talk to you about
well, of course.
Yeah.
But,
I thought you'd never ask.
What are the reforms? What would you like to see?
So look, it's a combination of those things, because it is the political culture, by the way. I mean, the structures are, in some cases now, how they're being operated, locking in dysfunction. But as I say, there are political choices that aren't always made, including putting off the tough stuff. But since, Mark Durkan coined the phrase 20 plus years ago of the ugly scaffolding of the Stormont institutions, I think there's been chat about reform and big changes and small changes and all of this, but it's never moved on, because everybody I think has been really, really broad about it, or there wasn't a way to find consensus. So the SDLP over the last few weeks and months has been really pushing with the two governments and increasingly now with the other parties, and I have yet to hear any convincing argument against 3 really focused reforms. terms of Stormont, what we're calling keyhole surgery. They protect the principles of power sharing, and they don't upset, any one community, but they'll make it work a little better. So this isn't the limit of our ambition, but one, retitle the first ministers. Like, one of them can't order paper clips without the other. That is very, very clear. Both of the largest parties have had time and had their mandates legitimately vindicated and been able to be the first minister and use that office as they wish. But recognising that it is a joint office in the title, and both parties, by the way, have used the title before of joint first minister, recognising that in the titles, I think, would bring back that sense of jointery, and it would also take some of the heat out of the big arm wrestle that Assembly elections become about who's going to be top dog. Because the bottom line is people's lives don't improve, based on who's the first minister. And as I say, rightly, it was a very significant change that Sinn Féin achieved that office, and they have rightly been able to serve that mandate. So nobody's proposing to change that right now. But in the next mandate, and reflecting a title that Sinn Féin and DUP themselves have both used, joint first ministers, that should be the title, and who's going to be the top of the pile should be slightly less salient an issue. Secondly,
that would be to your electoral advantage as well, because both Sinn Féin and the SDLP use that.
We clearly try to campaign on the quality of life issues for people. I don't know when the SDLP campaigned about being first minister. I'm ambitious and I'm optimistic, but that's not a campaign we've run in quite some time. And like I say, the politics around the last election, including unionist parties, particularly the DUP, saying that they wouldn't respect the outcome of the election, was an enormously significant issue. But we're about the Assembly isn't supposed to be about, a permanent arm wrestle. It's supposed to be about improving lives. And if elections can't become a place to talk about that, it's clearly shown in the outcome. So I think that, like I say, it's not something, that I've invented or the SDLP have invented. For years, Sinn Féin talked about joint head of government. And as I say, Arlene Foster at times had used the term as well. So we think it's a fairly uncontroversial proposal. There's other things I'd like to do.
Let's do the other two.
Yeah, the other two. So the election of a speaker. Currently, it can be petition of concern, and as I say, if one party doesn't wish a speaker to be elected, the show does not go on and the Assembly can't function. We think that threshold should be 2/3. 2/3 of the members of the Assembly should be able to elect the speaker. That means no individual community can be oppressed or suppressed, but it means that nobody can hold down the existence of an Assembly. So it can, even if there's challenges with forming an executive, MLAs can meet, committees can do their work. As I say, we can keep moving forward. 2/3 is already in the agreement. For example, it's the threshold for calling an election. So that's not a figure I've pulled out of nowhere. And we think that protects power sharing. It's really important that there's no sense of kicking the ladder away from any community, but it would mean that one party can't stop the whole show, right? Again, pretty uncontroversial, already elsewhere in the agreement. And the third is the change of what's called the St Andrews veto that was designed in by the two big parties and the two governments in late 2006, that essentially allows parties to stop issues even coming to the executive table. And it's like a preemptive veto even before you petition of concern it. And it means that the executive has become a place of log jam and people can't even get their issues to the table, and that is causing a lot of the logjam as well. So there will still be mechanisms for people to bring things forward or to express their concerns, but it allows ideas and policies to keep flowing. So there's other things I'd like to do. I'm totally up for the conversations around things like designation, around changing executive formation. Those are very big things, though. I'm realistic. This is about places. This is about ground where I think we can get consensus. And as I say, I've written to the other party leaders, but I've yet to hear an argument against any of those modest proposals. Like I say, it's not an amputation, it's not a lobotomy, it's keyhole surgery, fundamentally protects the ethos of the Good Friday Agreement. But I think nobody can tell me that things can go on as they are, with constant threat of collapse, with constant anxiety about, might it fall over on this or that, or might it come back? This would allow us to at least keep moving forward, and yes, have a wider conversation, especially as society evolves, about other changes. But I think this is a really good package of reforms, and I think the two governments need to take their courage and drive forward with them.
You didn't mention a funded opposition.
Ha! You're absolutely, and I think that's a big issue as well. Yeah, I think the opposition and Matthew and our MLA team across the board have demonstrated real value, and they are doing that on a shoestring. I know people don't necessarily like the idea of more money into the political system, but effectively they do that with, I suppose, bluntly, the cost of one SPAD, whereas each department has a couple. So with a pretty small staff resource, with an incredible staff team that we have, try to shadow all of those departments. And I think we are packing a punch, and I've identified areas like childcare, like Lough Neagh, like rates, like in housing, finance issues, where we have had those ideas picked up by other parties. But properly resourced would allow more and better scrutiny. The opposition, the existence of an opposition, by the way, is an evolution of the Good Friday Agreement. It wasn't in the original document, but it was an acknowledgement of the changing society that we are, and an acknowledgement that the Good Friday Agreement can change and evolve without losing its core principles of partnership and power sharing.
As a slight aside before I move on from Stormont, John Burrows, the new leader of the UUP, he made the point several times in my recent interview with him about non-binding motions. And that is where someone brings up something which they want to talk about, and they have a motion and a vote, and it's not about creating legislation, it's not about governing Northern Ireland. He was animated about that both at Stormont and at council level. I mean, I did point out to him that many people would feel like, an issue like Gaza, for example, and that's the example that he used, is of such importance that it is necessary and important to raise your voice. He said, no, this is not what Stormont or the local councils are for. What do you think?
Well, look, see, the non-binding motions thing, that is a massive issue, particularly when there's an absence of legislation. Look, all parliaments do that kind of discussing an issue, because I think people are entitled to talk about the issues of the world. And by the way, the support our region had over decades about other countries, if everybody stuck to the mantra, well, look, that's happening somewhere else, it's nothing to do with us, we wouldn't have had the investment, we wouldn't have had the international support that we had to get through our worst times. But the non-binding motions thing is hectic because it is used as a displacement activity. The actual legislation that the executive is bringing forward is completely paltry. It's way behind its own targets that came in, accepting the fact that they only had 3 years. So what you'll now have, Ciarán, is we've had 2 years of non-binding motions, and the party sometimes treat them like they're a big win. And you'll see a graphic on social media about, we've passed our motion on, sunshine and rainbows, and everyone will go, oh, brilliant, does that mean the Assembly's bringing in sunshine and rainbows? No, it doesn't. It simply means that everybody talked about it for 2 hours and agreed something, but it's not actual legislation, and it's not tracked through in policy. Similarly, around about this time last year, we had a big fanfare about the programme for government and doing what matters. And it wasn't exactly how I'd have written it. The SDLP produced its own plan for change, but it was at least a bit of a strategy. Do you ever hear anything more about it? No, you don't. And even the pretend, the draft multi-year budget, those two documents bear no relation. So yes, I think the non-binding motions are used by parties to sort of position and articulate and put out a message on social media, but they are not actually connecting to the things they are using their power to do. And I think that's a fundamental point, Ciarán. The Assembly, it isn't just a soft play centre for politicians. It's supposed to be about, using the power and the substantial financial resource that the Assembly and the Executive have to change people's lives. And that's not happening. So yes, the non-binding motions, we spent 2 years talking about them. Sometimes weeks go past in the Assembly with no actual legislation. But what you'll now find, because the election's next May, so the Assembly will wind up in about March, now there's going to be, in the next few months, you're going to see tons of legislation. It's going to have to be scrutinised kind of at speed, and mistakes will be made. So it's frustrating that the first 2 years were spent, as I say, positioning, articulating, essentially creating wee videos for social media to tell everybody how great you are, and not actually using the power. And that's an important, as I say, thing to keep in your mind. The Assembly, the Stormont Executive, they have power. There's always constraints financially. We don't, as an MP, I'll always shout for more money from Westminster, but they have a budget of what going on, 20 billion. They can do things. They can actually, they went out at the election and they told people they would do things, and they're not. So yes, the non-binding motions, that is absolutely something that can change, including as well the timeline. If you're putting in a motion, you've got a 2-week lag. So for example, we put in an opposition day motion on the rates issue, but it takes you 2 weeks to get it to the floor. It's not a responsive policy. So there's lots and lots of changes that could be made and should be made, and I'm glad to hear that John Burrows is up for that discussion. But those three are the ones that allow the show to keep moving and politics to keep functioning.
And you've been very clear about that. Some interest, and there's some common ground with John Burrows there, but we in the media, I suppose, are part of that hypocrisy because we often find headlines and stories in these non-binding debates and motions. Well, because that's because
that's whatever is really being served up in the absence of actual legislation. And don't get me wrong. I mean, like Westminster, every 2 or 3 weeks there is opposition day, and we as the opposition about once a month get to control the order paper. But that's all you're getting. It'd be different if you're getting, as I say, a discussion on appropriate topical issues like, as you say, international issues like Gaza. But when that's all you get, and by the way, it's not even big moral questions of our time. A lot of the time it's very pedestrian things that the executive could be actually influencing, but they're not. So as I say, they're passing a motion, they're putting out graphics saying we've passed the motion, but there's no, basically they've pulled the lever and nothing's happening behind, and they're not actually changing people's lives, and that is contributing to people feeling totally switched off and disempowered. And the SDLP is really, really determined that people will feel connected, will feel that devolution and politics is the way to change your life.
Now, constitutional change, Irish unity, a united Ireland, call it what you want. Now, I have to admit, I'm quite the cynical person when it comes to this debate, because whenever I ask people for even the most cold and calculating political analyst, whenever they're asked, do you think there is going to be a united Ireland? Lo and behold, by some mad coincidence, their analysis is the same as the desires of their heart. It's something which we're just not able to detach ourselves from. Do you think it's inevitable?
No, I don't think it's inevitable. I wouldn't use the word inevitable. No, I don't think, and I think it's a dangerous in anything. Because
in all fairness, I really never hear anybody say it's inevitable, but nationalists in general are accused of that.
Well, I'm here to be honest with you and I'm here to be honest with the electorate as well. I think it is A, desirable, B, possible, C, likely, and something that we're actively working for. But no, it's not inevitable change. It has to be built, and it has to be built properly. And anybody who tells you that demographics will get you there and you don't have to do any work, who just talks about the mobilisation part of it and not the persuasion and not the preparation, I think is doing the issue a disservice. My starting point is the status quo is not working for us. Both, as I say,
that doesn't clash with all the things you said about Stormont.
It absolutely, like I say, Stormont needs to work in the here and now, because this isn't going to happen tomorrow, and calling out dates for a border poll doesn't actually get it done in any way. People's real lives right now are supposed to be served by Stormont, so that's one good reason to make it work in the here and now. And as I say, when we go to have, for example, a referendum in the Republic, if people are able to go, sure, look at the state of them. They can't make it work up there. They can't spend the money that they have properly. Look at the state of their rivers, lochs, look at the public services. That's going to make the conversation more difficult in the Republic. But even outside, even if the Assembly gets its act together, and as I say, we're determined to play a role in that, the UK is changing. The Faragification of British politics, and as I say, I'm over there weekly and I see it. The values change, and the fact that the other political parties, in the main, with some notable exceptions, are adjusting around that, and that is, as I say, a different worldview. It is a low prioritisation of our needs here. But you imagine if it is a government of reform led by a reform in it, say like they do go ahead with their flagship proposal of leaving the ECHR, and gosh, the lawyers come in and say it's pretty complicated with Northern Ireland. Do you think they're going to spend months and years trying to untangle it, or do you think they're just going to bounce? And if you look at the Brexiters, and they've had the bus with the "we send £300 million to the EU," wait till they see our bill. Do you think those English nationalists are going to gleefully and continue to spend here? So the UK is changing, and at the same time you have in the Republic, and it's not perfect, and and actually we think, the process of a new Ireland can be a way to make better things in the Republic as well. But you are looking over, as I say, at a stable, open, dynamic economy. You're looking at an ethical foreign policy. You're looking at a society that had shown itself able to adapt to change, a society that values the arts, the society where people's votes actually matter and do things. And I think that's appealing to a lot of people. So that's a lot of the why I want constitutional change. And for the SDLP, we think we've got a really big role to play in that, because if you think of this conversation happening over the next 10 years and you, as a thought exercise, think of it without a party like the SDLP, who's got a history of anti-sectarianism and convening people from different political traditions, that has connections across the parties. If you think of having that conversation without us, I don't think anybody would tell you it will go so well. So there's a lot of work to do, which is why we've been pressing both governments, and particularly the Irish government in this, to think about the planning. Brexit is a really good example of how not to do constitutional change, but it is a really good example of how the Irish government prepared, even for an outcome that they thought unlikely. In Brexit, we know now what an enormous level of thinking and planning and contingency work was done for that. And we think that if they put the same level of thinking and capacity into creating a new Ireland, it will help people answer the questions that need to be answered when the time comes for a referendum. I'm not putting a date on it. I don't think that helps. I want people to feel optimistic, to feel hopeful. I think there's a lot to feel hopeful about, but that will require preparation. And that will require the governments to get properly involved. So no, I don't think it's inevitable, but I do think it's likely, and I do think it's desirable, and I am excited about it.
You say desirable. I mean, and I have to say, I was speaking to a colleague about that, and my colleague was pointing out, that perhaps yourself and Colm Eastwood have been more forthright and urgent on the new Ireland issue than the SDLP leaders in the more recent past. And Brexit, there are a number of issues coming about apart because of that. And I just wondered if you would articulate any sort of a vision you would have for that.
Well, the reason that is the SDLP unashamedly prioritises people's needs, right, in the here and now. And we have always, for decades, invested our time and our energy into reconciliation, into the economy, into making things work, right? And it was not about checking out of Northern Ireland and just going hell for leather into constitutional change, because that simply wouldn't have worked. So we make no apologies for at times prioritising sorting out things like Brexit. But as I say, we are reading the world around us, and that's why there's a renewed focus. And as I said at the start of the interview, those core SDLP I suppose projects around peace, around power sharing, around North-South and around equality have now become reconciliation, good government, opportunity and a new Ireland. It's the same project. And I think my vision, it's of an anti-sectarian, reconciled, social democratic nation, and I think that really does it appeals. It's not, as I say, to me and to a lot of other people, it's not a tribal thing. It's not about an historic wrong being righted. It's about people having authorship over their lives, being in a functional politics in a country that has a positive and a proud place in the world. It isn't about a big rupture of everything either. I say this as well. Your kids will still go to the local school. You probably still have the same job. But I think there are enormous political benefits, and I appreciate that change is not as exciting for a lot of other people. But we are in the patient work of talking to people, understanding what they're anxious about, understanding what bits appeal, and as I say, slowly filling in the picture of what it'll look like for people, and how people will feel protected even if it isn't what they want. Because here's another thing. I'm an Irish person who has lived my whole adult life in the UK. That's not exactly how I wish things constitutionally, but that's what the majority want, so I make it work. And you want to see how we can make the same apply to somebody of a British identity who maybe isn't, it isn't exactly the way they see the world, but that they can be comfortable, because it's not about reversing partition. It's not about, as we did 100 years ago, trapping this big unhappy minority. It's about making sure the next 100 years is better than that, and learning the lessons of those failures. But I think the economic opportunities are enormous. And as I say, that sense of authorship and democratic control over your life, I think appeals to a lot of people as well.
I suppose that's something, in terms of, I don't like to say winning and losing, but and other things like that. Because, I mean, apart from talking about unity and unitary state, the federal state, keeping Northern Ireland, of course, there are things, like a lot of times that I've been talking to people from a unionist background, and they say, listen, there's going to be no United Ireland, there's going to be no border poll, and we don't need to talk about it. But if there was, we would want this, and the other. And there's a wish list. And there's almost like, this would definitely happen. But if that happened, that would, the bitter pill the people of the Irish Republic, as is now, would have to swallow would be so bitter, because you can have a non-sectarian state, but a nation state exists for the nation. It simply does. And I just wonder. What I mean is, say if we have a situation where there's the flag and it's only a piece of cloth. There's the anthem. There's those things, but there's also cultural issues like the Irish language, for example. If it was stripped of all status, for example, and protections in order to accommodate unionists, I mean, that would not go down well, for example. So I just wonder, in terms of, I mean, that's part of the debate, surely, isn't it?
Yeah, I think sometimes that can be a little bit, it's happening at a superficial level, and people are going, oh, no, nobody wants to do. And I think as they go, because those symbolic issues, yes, they're important, but I think the possibilities for example, a health service that works, that combines, the best bits of free at the point of use with the outcomes that you get in the Republic's health service, I think are probably what's going to move minds a little bit more. The fact is, as I say, the Republic has shown real capacity for change. Things like the referendums on equal marriage, and the fact that it's gone from an ethnic minority population of about 1% to about 20% has shown that capacity. And I think also the accommodation of Britishness currently, as I say, most people in the Republic watch the BBC and follow an English football team, etc., etc. I accept, and I think that's part of the problem, is there are people whose Irishness is based on being not British, but I don't think that's a majority position at all. So yeah, there will be trade-offs, and the SDLP is always up for having the honest conversations. We're not pretending that this is a click your fingers, throw it out into a border poll, everything will work out, the weather will be great, everyone will be gorgeous, you'll be loaded. We're prepared to have those difficult conversations, but I do not think they're insurmountable. We're not radically different societies, and fundamentally, Ciarán, Britain and Ireland will always be next door neighbours and best friends, and there will always be hundreds of thousands of people of either identity, living in the opposite country. That those bonds will not change. I suppose it's a different political configuration, but yeah, I think it's entirely possible. But yes, of course, it has to be discussed, and that's why it's not a date-led project. So I'm relaxed about the potential to have those conversations and understand what's really, really important for people in terms of protection and vindication of their identity, but also crucially about the economic opportunities that people want to have, about, as I say, the type of society that we want to live in. And I genuinely believe that can be more validly constructed in a reconciled New Ireland that takes the best of both systems.
We're approaching our final questions, so you'll be pleased to hear. I mean, obviously, we know that that there are people of a unionist background, unionist culture, British culture, Protestant culture. We know that, and clearly, this is a massive obstacle to a new Ireland. They simply don't want a united Ireland, or even have the conversation about a united Ireland at this stage. But I put it to you that now that perhaps they aren't the greatest obstacle to United Ireland. And the greatest obstacle to United Ireland may well be Catholics, and some of them who may vote for nationalist parties, but they may be happy, contented, assimilated. I'll use the term, they may be anglicised, because, British soccer, British education, language, history, everything, the labour movement, for a variety of reasons. They may fear their pensions. They may feel Irish in a sense, but without any connection to the Republic of Ireland. And it strikes me, I suppose, looking out the window, that quiet, perhaps a fifth, and I'm looking at polls, I'm looking at the census, a fifth of Catholics aren't nationalists at all, and that would seem to me to be a massive barrier to a new
so
Ireland.
look, this is the thing. I'm long enough in this game to know that people vote for a whole variety of reasons, and different things motivate people, and people are pragmatic, and that's why, as I say, yes, it's ultimately, when the day comes, it will be down to numbers and a democratic exercise. But that's why this isn't a tribal thing. It isn't just a cohort thing. It is about people making a decision, and that's the beauty of the principle of consent. All of us, and our difference and diversity, making that decision together and building something new. And I think we are making and will continue to make a case that is better than the status quo. Because yes, if people feel that they're very content and they're respected, and they have all the opportunities that they need, you're right, they're less motivated to change. I don't think that's how people feel here. I don't think that they feel the public services deliver for them. I don't think that they feel that the political culture does allow and encourage people to be who they are. I think things like Brexit laid bare the political imbalances and inequalities that within the UK, that frankly, no matter what we voted for and no matter what was right for us, what London wanted won through. And I think that's probably exposed a lot of people to the realities of this. But yeah, look, people will vote for how it will affect their lives and the lives of their families, and how they think it will affect their ability to live their lives. And as I say, I'm not knocking on people's doors saying vote for it tomorrow. I won't be able to tell you anything about it. We are in the business of planning and building that picture, which is why the SDLP is working hard to get the Irish government to properly engage. And it has been, it's been doing really positive stuff with the likes of the Shared Island unit. But that's why, for example, we are calling for a minister for a New Ireland, a cabinet level position that will kind of lead and allow that worldview and converging services to be a fundamental part of the Irish government. So yeah, I know people have unanswered questions, and as I say, it's not about let's just all decide and we'll figure out the details later. We're about the careful, boring business of planning. But I think it is an exciting prospect, and bluntly, I don't want to finish on a negative. The status quo isn't working for people here.
What should, just a final question?
You said the last one was the
I
last
did. I did. But what should provoke a border poll then?
Well, look, there's. I'm not going to put a number on. I think it's when you're getting work done. Do you want it done properly, or do you want it done quickly? Something, when we're talking about creating a modern, pluralist new nation, you don't want to just slip it past with a tiny wee minority as fast as you can, and everything's up in the air. You want to do it properly. So I think when it's clear that a border poll, a referendum would pass, is the time to do it. But when the work is properly done, Ciarán.
Claire Hanna, thank you very much.